Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
I've been living in my house for 15 years now, in this quiet little neighborhood that sits right next to the city but still feels like a small town. When I first moved here, there were only a handful of houses on our street, and I was lucky enough to get along great with all my neighbors. We even started throwing street parties 3 times a year just to stay connected and catch up with each other. The thing is, there was always one house that never joined us. Across from my place, there's this duplex tucked away behind some trees with a long paved driveway leading up to it. For the first 10 years I lived here, I never even saw the guy who owned it. He was a complete recluse, and honestly, I respected that. Some people just want to be left alone. But then weird stuff started happening. I hired some painters to work on my house, and even though I had plenty of parking space in my own driveway, they decided to park on the street right in front of his property. The next day, I walked outside and saw concrete blocks lined up perfectly along his side of the street. I thought it was pretty ridiculous because in all my years living here, not one single car had ever parked in that spot before. His house was way down that driveway anyway, so it's not like the parking affected him at all. I just laughed it off as some quirky territorial thing. That was nothing compared to what happened a year and a half ago. My wife got this anonymous letter in the mail with no return address. The letter addressed her by name and said she knew a lot of people around the neighborhood. It asked her to make sure some boys stayed off the writer's property. Inside the envelope were printed photos of 3 kids. One of them was our 7-year-old son. The other 2 were his friends who lived next door to this guy, and apparently they'd been using his driveway as a shortcut to get to each other's houses. Look, I get it. I wouldn't want random kids cutting through my property either, but sending anonymous letters with photos instead of just knocking on my door like a normal person, that seemed pretty weird to me. Still, I figured I should handle it properly. I called a meeting at my house with all 3 boys and their parents. We sat them down and made it crystal clear that they needed to stay away from his property completely. I told the boys they couldn't go on that man's driveway anymore, not even as a shortcut. When my son complained that it would take forever to walk around the long way, I told him I didn't care and that he needed to stay off the neighbor's property. All 3 boys agreed right away. During that meeting, I learned from the other father that he'd been having some kind of property line dispute with this neighbor for a while. 2 days later, someone knocked on my door. It was a neighbor from down the street, and she was holding a printed sign. She told me I should see what was posted all over the neighborhood. The sign read something threatening about calling the police if the boys were seen on the property again, and attached to it were those same photos of my son and his friends. She told me these signs were posted on every single power line and street light within 6 blocks of our houses. I was absolutely furious. Who does something like that? These were pictures of little kids being displayed all over the neighborhood like they were wanted criminals. My wife and I drove around and pulled down every single sign we could find. I gathered up all the signs and that anonymous letter and walked straight down to the police station. I figured this had to be some kind of harassment or something. The officer listened to my complaint but told me the neighbor hadn't actually broken any laws. He said the guy might be a terrible neighbor, but posting signs on public property wasn't illegal. When I asked if he could just put pictures of my kid all over town, the officer explained that he wasn't making direct threats. There wasn't much they could do since it was more of a civil matter. I left the station feeling pretty defeated. I went home and had another serious talk with my son, showing him the letter and signs. I explained that this was what the neighbor had done because he thought my son was on his property, and I told him he needed to stay as far away from that creepy guy as possible. My son promised he would. Things stayed quiet for about a year after that, but then something sad happened. The father of my son's friend passed away unexpectedly, and his family had to move away. This past summer, my son was playing in front of our house when a new kid came out from the rental side of the neighbor's duplex. The kid walked over and introduced himself. Turns out his dad was the new tenant, a single father who'd just moved in. My son and this new boy became friends pretty quickly. I decided I should fill the new tenant in on what he was dealing with. I gave him a heads up about his landlord and explained that he'd had issues with kids before. When the tenant asked what kind of issues, I told him the whole story about the letters and signs. He seemed pretty shocked and told me he'd make sure his son knew to stay away from the landlord's property. About a month later, this guy showed up at my door looking really upset. He was holding one of those familiar anonymous letters. He told me to look at what he'd received and said his landlord was trying to evict him after just 1 month. The letter was complaining that his girlfriend had been parking on the driveway at night, even though there was plenty of space. It also mentioned he'd been working on his motorcycle, which apparently violated his lease somehow. The tenant explained that his girlfriend only parked there at night when she stayed over, and there was tons of room. He said he was just doing basic maintenance on his bike and didn't know what to do. I told him it was ridiculous and offered to let him use my land if he needed to. I said he could park in front of my house and work on his bike there because I didn't mind. He asked if I was sure, and I told him it would be great to help out. A few days later, I heard a knock on my door. When I opened it, there stood a man I'd never seen before. After 15 years, I was finally face to face with my entitled neighbor. He said he needed to talk to me about his tenant's girlfriend parking in front of my house. When I asked what about it, he told me she couldn't park there and that it wasn't allowed. I explained that I had given them permission to park there and that it wasn't his property anyway. He insisted that it was in front of my house and that I needed to tell them to stop. I told him I didn't own the land in front of my house since the city did, and I asked what he expected me to do, put cement blocks in front of my house, or take a picture of the girlfriend and post it everywhere. He started getting more agitated, so I'd had enough. I told him to get lost and slammed the door in his face. The following week, the tenant texted me with some disturbing news. He said someone had gone through his girlfriend's car the night before. She had left it unlocked and someone went through the glove compartment and took an old phone. Sure enough, another unsigned letter showed up warning the girlfriend not to park there anymore. When the tenant called the police, they said the same thing without concrete evidence. It was a civil matter. But here's where things got interesting. A few months earlier, I'd installed security cameras on my property. When I checked the footage from that night, I saw my entitled neighbor, clear as day, going through the girlfriend's car. I immediately emailed the video to the tenant, along with a detailed written account of everything this neighbor had done to us over the years. The concrete blocks, the anonymous letters, the signs with my son's picture, all of it. The tenant told me the evidence was incredible and that he was moving out but definitely taking legal action against the landlord. The tenant moved out the next week, but he followed through on his threat. With my video evidence and written testimony about the neighbor's pattern of harassment, he took the case to court. A few months later, I got the most satisfying phone call. The tenant called to tell me they had won and that the judge had awarded him $8,000 in damages. He said my video and testimony had made all the difference. I told him that was fantastic and that the neighbor had finally gotten what was coming to him. The tenant thanked me for helping and said that without my evidence, he never would have been able to prove what kind of person the landlord really was. After 15 years of dealing with this guy's bizarre behavior, watching him finally face his actions felt absolutely amazing. My grandfather worked at the local water treatment plant alongside his best friend since childhood. They were both sons of Polish immigrants, first-generation Americans who had built their lives from nothing. These two were inseparable, lived on the same street, bowled together every week, took family vacations together, the whole 9 yards. Their kids were all around the same age too, mostly late teens to early 20s, except for my mom, who was still just a kid. My grandfather was more than just a regular factory worker though. He had worked his way up to a high-ranking position in the local labor union. This was back when unions had some pretty interesting connections, if you know what I mean. The kind of connections that the FBI kept tabs on. We never knew for sure, but there were always whispers about my grandfather knowing people who could get things done when the law couldn't. One Sunday, my grandfather was expecting his friend to come over for their usual football watching routine. This guy was never late for anything. World War II veteran, punctual as clockwork. When he didn't show up, my grandfather knew something was seriously wrong. He called over to his friend's house, and what he heard on the other end of the line made his blood run cold. His friend was crying, actually crying. This was a man who had stormed beaches in the Pacific who never showed emotion, and he was sobbing into the phone. My grandfather asked what had happened and what was wrong. The story came out piece by piece. The friend's eldest daughter had recently broken up with her fiancé. The night before, she had gone to his place to collect some of her belongings. An argument started and it escalated quickly. The entitled piece of garbage beat her so badly she could barely walk. When it was over, she stumbled home in shock, but in her condition, she had left her keys behind. She spent the entire night sitting on the front porch, unable to get inside, until her father came out for the morning paper. My grandfather asked if he had called the police. His friends said of course he did, but they told him there was nothing they could do. The attacker's friends all swore they were out drinking with him that night. They had what seemed like a solid alibi. My grandfather asked how it was possible since she was a witness to her own attack, but his friend explained that it didn't matter because of who the attacker's father was. That was the problem. The entitled brat's father was a city councilman. In the 1960s, that meant something. The cops took one look at who they were dealing with and decided they had better things to do than investigate the son of someone important. My mother was in the room when my grandfather's whole demeanor changed. She still remembers how his voice went from angry to completely emotionless, almost robotic. He told his friend not to worry about the investigation because these things had a way of working themselves out. He said he would call him back later. He hung up the phone and told my grandmother he needed to run an errand. He was gone for about an hour, and when he came back, he acted like nothing had happened. Weeks went by. The friend's daughter was slowly healing physically, but emotionally, she was a wreck. Her father kept trying to get the police to do something, anything, but he kept hitting walls. The entitled kid was walking around town like nothing had happened, probably bragging to his friends about what he had done. One day, my grandfather suggested that they all go to the state fair that had just come to town. He thought it would take everyone's mind off things for a day. His friend didn't really feel like going anywhere, but my grandfather insisted, saying he would even pay for everything. His friend finally agreed, probably just to get my grandfather to stop asking. So the whole group went to the fair, both families, all the kids, everyone. My grandfather was in an unusually good mood that day, insisting on taking pictures of everyone together. He bought souvenirs for all the kids. My mother got a teddy bear that she still has to this day. Throughout the entire day, my grandfather made sure they documented everything. Group photos, pictures with timestamps from the fair rides, receipts for food and games. He was like a man on a mission, making sure there was proof that everyone was together, having a good time. When they got home that evening, there were 2 police cars parked in front of the friend's house. The cops immediately approached them when they got out of their cars. They said they needed to ask some questions about everyone's whereabouts that day. The friend asked what this was about. The officer explained that earlier that morning, someone had jumped his daughter's ex-fiancé during his morning walk. 2 large men threw him in a car and dumped him at the hospital 3 hours later. Every bone in both legs and arms was broken, along with several ribs, his nose, and jaw. He was looking at months of recovery and would probably never walk right again. The friend just stood there with his mouth open. Before he could say anything, my grandfather stepped forward. He told the officers that they were all together at the state fair that day, had been there since opening. He said he had the souvenirs to prove it, and if they gave him an hour, he could get the pictures developed to show them exactly where they were and when. He pulled out all the receipts, showed them the timestamp tickets from the rides, even had my mother show them her teddy bear with the fair tag still attached. One officer asked if all of them were together the entire day. My grandfather confirmed that every single one of them was there, and said they could ask anyone at the fair since they were the loud group taking pictures all day long. The police looked through everything, took some notes, but eventually realized they had nothing. No witnesses, no evidence connecting anyone in the group to what happened. They left empty-handed. After the police cars disappeared, the friend just stared at my grandfather. He started to ask how my grandfather had managed this, but my grandfather cut him off. He said that crime in the city was getting worse by the day, and it was terrible what had happened to that young man. He hoped they would catch whoever did it. He patted his friend on the shoulder and gave him that slight smile my mother remembered so well. His friend understood immediately and gave my grandfather the biggest bear hug, thanking him for the wonderful day at the fair. They stayed best friends for the rest of their lives and never spoke about that day again. The friend's daughter eventually healed completely, got married to a good man, and had kids of her own. Whenever any of us kids would ask my grandfather about the incident years later, he would just shake his head sadly. He would say that it was such a terrible crime and he hoped they would catch whoever did that someday. Then he would change the subject, usually to something about how we should always treat people with respect and never take advantage of others. The entitled brat spent months in the hospital and came out in a wheelchair. Word around town was that he became very nervous whenever he saw anyone from our family or his ex-girlfriend's family. He would actually cross the street or duck into stores to avoid us. My mother and aunts all remember seeing him around town for years afterward, always looking over his shoulder, always afraid. The cocky, entitled attitude was gone forever. His father's position couldn't protect him from the streets, and everyone knew it. His ex-fiancée went on to live a beautiful life. She met someone who treated her like a queen, had a wonderful family, and stayed close with my family for decades. She got the happiness she deserved, while he got exactly what he deserved. I work as a construction foreman, and I'm 43 years old. I've been married to my wife for 5 years now, and we have what you'd call a blended family. She brought her 19-year-old daughter into our marriage, and we also have 2 younger boys, my 16-year-old stepson and our 9-year-old son together. My stepdaughter has been trouble from day one. She's always had this attitude that the world owes her something. When she was in high school, she expected us to pay for everything like designer clothes, the latest phone, trips with friends. When she didn't get her way, she'd throw massive tantrums, and my wife would usually cave. She's currently in her 2nd year of college at a state school about 4 hours away. She took out student loans to pay for tuition and lives on campus, so housing and food are covered. We also send her $100 every month for expenses, which I thought was pretty generous, considering she's an adult now. The incident happened on a Saturday night about 3 weeks ago. I was sound asleep when our phone started ringing at 3 a.m. You know that feeling when you hear the phone at that hour? Your heart just drops. My wife shot up like a rocket and answered. My wife picked up the phone and said, "Hello," several times. There was some shuffling. Then she heard a recorded voice asking if she would accept a collect call from the county jail. My wife's face went white as she quickly accepted the call. Then we heard her daughter's voice, shaky and clearly drunk. She told her mom that she needed to come get her because she was in jail. My wife asked what happened and if she was okay. Her daughter explained that she had been at a party with friends and they were walking back to campus. She thought they were going to her friend Sarah's house, but it was the wrong house. The people called the cops on them, and when they saw the police, they ran. She got caught. My wife told her we were coming right now and would be there as soon as possible. She hung up and literally yanked the blankets off me. My wife ordered me to get up because we had to go right away. I told her to hold on because it was 3 a.m. and a 4-hour drive. I needed some sleep before I could safely drive that far. She said that her daughter was in jail and was scared and alone. I pointed out that she was also safe and that she had made adult choices and was now dealing with what happens next. I told her that we had 2 other kids sleeping in the house, and I wasn't going to wake them up at 4 a.m. to drag them along or leave them alone. She asked if I was just going to leave her daughter there. I said yes until I could get some sleep and drive safely. She could wait until 7 a.m., and if my wife wanted to go now, she could drive herself. My wife has astigmatism and doesn't like driving at night, so I knew she wouldn't take that option. She kept arguing with me, saying she couldn't believe I was being so heartless and that her daughter was my stepdaughter too. I told her that her daughter was 19 years old and had gotten drunk, trespassed, and ran from police. A few extra hours in jail might teach her something. She realized I wasn't budging and let me go back to sleep. But she didn't sleep a wink. I could hear her pacing around the house all night. At 7 a.m. sharp, she shook me awake and told me to get up because we were leaving now. She had already told the boys what happened and arranged for my mother-in-law to come watch our 9-year-old. The whole drive there, she kept making passive-aggressive comments. She kept saying that her daughter had probably been crying all night and must be so scared. She said she couldn't believe we left her there for 4 extra hours. Then she said that a real father would have jumped out of bed right away. That last comment really got to me. I told her that a real father teaches his kids that actions have results, and if our 9-year-old was in jail at 19, I'd do the exact same thing. She said that was different, and I knew it. I said no, it wasn't different, because her daughter was an adult who made stupid choices. When we got to the jail, my stepdaughter came out looking rough, hungover, mascara smeared, still in her party clothes. But instead of being grateful or apologetic, she went on the attack. She demanded to know what took us so long and complained that she had been in there forever. My wife apologized and said they got there as fast as they could. She shot me a dirty look, clearly expecting me to apologize too. I didn't say anything. She went on to say that the other girl's parents were there hours ago and asked if we knew how embarrassing it was to be the last one picked up. I told her maybe she shouldn't get arrested next time. She asked me to excuse her, clearly offended. I said she heard me correctly. I pointed out that she was 19 years old, had gotten drunk, trespassed on someone's property, and ran from police. She was lucky they didn't add more charges. She turned to her mother and asked if she was going to let me talk to her like that. My wife said I was just upset and that we were all upset, but I wasn't done. I told her that we also weren't paying her bail. She could use her own money or figure it out with a payment plan. She asked what I meant and said she didn't have that kind of money. I told her maybe she should have thought about that before she decided to play drunk games with the police. My wife looked mortified, but I was tired of this girl thinking we'd just fix every problem she created. The ride home was tense. My stepdaughter kept complaining about how uncomfortable jail was, how the other inmates were scary, and how she couldn't believe we made her wait so long. Not once did she apologize or acknowledge that her behavior was the problem. When we got home, she started telling the boys about her adventure like it was some funny story. That's when I'd had enough. I told her to stop right there. She asked what now with an attitude. I said she didn't get to make this sound fun or cool. She had broken the law, scared her mother, and shown complete disrespect for other people's property. She rolled her eyes and said I was being dramatic because it wasn't that serious. I asked if it really wasn't that serious, then told her to pay her own bail, pay for her own gas money for this trip, and figure out her own legal fees since it wasn't a big deal. That's when she realized I was serious. Her whole attitude changed, and she said she didn't mean it that way. She said she appreciated us coming to get her. I asked if she really did appreciate it because it sounded like she thought we owed her a rescue service. My wife jumped in before this could escalate further, but I'd made my point. Later that night, my wife and I had a huge fight about my lack of compassion and how I was treating her daughter like a stranger. The next week, my stepdaughter called and actually apologized. She also got a part-time job on campus to help pay for the legal fees and bail money. My wife still thinks I was too harsh, but I noticed she hasn't gotten any more 3 a.m. calls from jail. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.